Confusion can only be the result when people develop a style in which they can perform different in a business or social environment from the way they do in their religious environment and yet feel no tension. Although retaining a pietistic stance, many today are functionally existentialists, living much like anyone else up and down the street according to ambiguous standards. There does exist an encroaching postmodernist secularism attended by philosophical, theological, and biblical neglect. Situation ethics seems to be winning by default. The lack of Christological basis for ethics is devastating. Not only adults, but our young people of high school and college age possess very little personal understanding of what it is to be a Christian. As a result of the radical 60s and 70s, we stopped preparing educational directors and began to train youth ministers, which in my estimation is only one facet of our shift from the rational analytical to the emotional in religion. Please do not misunderstand. There is a very important place for youth ministers. But frankly, many of them appear to be substituting emotional pablum for serious biblical study in an effort to keep the kids coming. And tragically, many of our children now leave our churches for an adult world with no firm ability to articulate who they are before God and in the midst of an increasingly demanding world. On the whole, they appear to be philosophically, biblically, theologically, and ethically bankrupt. In the mid-50s, we were among the top 5 groups in Christendom in terms of numbers of foreign missionaries. Now we have fewer than 400, I'm told, and are not even on anyone's list. We are training some, but churches are not sending. Perhaps there's an economic reason for this neglect in missions, but I think the reason is deeper. In the 50s and 60s, hundreds went abroad, but with the demise of the issues came confusion about identity. If lostness is not defined in terms of sectarian issues, then what is lostness? If the message is unclear, then why take it? In the 70s, the sectarian approach left very basic questions unanswered and zeal dwindled. American disinterest in foreign affairs during and after the Vietnam era affected negatively our concept of missions. Sponsoring churches decided to spend their money at home, not on the poor as the Bible might have suggested, but on property enhancement. In the absence of a firm sectarian identity, we began to feel very comfortable with materialism, and in this, we reflected our interest in church budgets. Missions and benevolence gave way to buildings, multiple staffs to serve the growing demands of self-realization. In this connection, one might observe how worship has changed. The revivalism we have known since frontier days was geared to elicit conversion and responses, primarily from denominationalists, with primary attention to argumentative sermons. Now, however, we live in a post-revivalism era. Gospel meetings are no longer vogue. A new socioeconomic pattern has emerged among us since World War II, in which we have crossed the tracks economically and are now essentially a middle-class urban movement. Rather than attend annoying, guilt-inducing revival sessions, many now want to be entertained and made to feel good. What worship is to be is uncertain. Some view self-realization as the essence of worship, and not a few preachers are turning to an evangelical view of worship as recruitment. Pragmatism has become the name of the game for many. The choice of music is often governed by its entertainment value rather than its theological perspective. Told by some that expository preaching is boring, preachers now search for something that will provide a heightened emotional experience. Now, while change from revivalism is not particularly unwelcomed, certain confusion derives from attempts to draw the essence of our newness in worship from evangelical circles rather than to create a genuinely biblical theology of worship following our ideals. This curious confusion in worship among us today has a decidedly hollow ring to it. Evangelism by those in the pews is negligible, but not, I think, because of lack of commitment. 20 years ago, people knew what they were going to say when they knocked on doors. But today, issue-oriented evangelism provides neither content nor motivation. Attempts to involve those in pews in evangelism are often met with reluctance. You see, people who belong to various denominations are no longer viewed as primary targets for evangelism. And there seems to be very little interest in getting personally involved with people whose lives are in disarray. The priesthood of all believers, you see, has given way to a clergy-laity system in which now it is more convenient to enjoy pleasant middle-class benefits, relying upon the ministerial staff to take care of those matters. Unfortunately, the church sees itself as audience. It is not surprising, then, that there is a steady exodus from our pulpits. More are leaving full-time ministry annually than all of our training programs together are able to supply. True, some of these were inadequately trained for ministry and perhaps should not have been there to begin with. The transition from issue-oriented preaching to expository preaching has caught others without necessary skills. Still others, caught between a contemporary pew and a sectarian leadership, quit in frustration. But these and other matters create the aura of flatness and uncertainty which concerns us. There is reason for concern. We might not make it. It is not a foregone conclusion that the American Restoration heritage is guaranteed longevity. In the history of Christian thought, those who have attempted restoration characteristically have crystallized, painted themselves into corners, and become marginal, mere shadows of once thriving pasts. We've been headed in that direction.